Well, welcome back to Ideas of Work and Beyond. Let me go over some hard, cold facts. 1,000 people, 145,616 square feet of interior building space, 9.5 acres of paid parking, 270 wheeled military vehicles, 583 trailers, tool fuel tanks, combined capacity 6,000 gallons, and many personal vehicles. In addition, it will be floodlit at night. This is what is being proposed to be put on the property commonly referred to as Lee Farms. We are joined this evening in our second segment by just a pillar of the community, Christine Rotello, who, among other things, raised Paul Rotello to be a wonderful public servant, and you have come out in no uncertain terms against what they're proposing to do.
I have.
And I guess my question is, what had you gotten yourself into? You're fighting the United States Army. Explain yourself.
That's true. I'm fighting the United States Army. And you know, it's interesting. The United States Army is something I would never have thought I would want to fight.
Yeah, I would start a little smaller.
I feel strongly that any city in the United States that the United States Army would like to put a base in should welcome the United States Army.
It's kind of a patriotic thing to do.
Yeah, and I think that, on the other hand, that the Army has an obligation to pick its sites very, very carefully. Because they want to be a good neighbor. It pays to be a good neighbor, and I'm sure they want to be a good neighbor. And I think this particular spot is not going to make them be a good neighbor in so many ways. For one thing, it sits in a position where they're going to be at the very top of a hill, the top of Worcester Heights. And
just for the viewers at home, describe the property so we're all on the same page. Like, where's it near the airport, the mall?
Yeah,
what we're talking about?
The property is, if you go up to the top of this road that we call Worcester Heights Road, if you get up to the top of there and look down, you'll look down on the airport. But it's also, it's not just the airport. I mean, the airport is what you look down at. But Lee Farm is so beautiful. It's all meadows. It's meadows and woodland. If you go up to the top of Worcester Heights and take a left where the Bartlett Tree Company headquarters was, you go down this little road, it's like Sherwood Forest. It is not to be believed. It is so untouched and so beautiful that it's really quite incredible. And that's where they're going to be putting, where the Army proposes anyway, to put several buildings that will hold trucks, all kinds of Army vehicles. And across the street from that, when you go back up to Worcester Heights and take a right into Lee Corporate Farm Road, on that side will be the I think it's 2 or 3 story office building kind of thing, and a huge parking lot that will be the actual headquarters of the Army Reserve Center. And that happens to occupy some of the most beautiful open land you have ever seen. Just absolutely lovely. It's really, I don't know. I was concerned at first that they were going to put it down on another meadow that I have loved since I was a little girl. And I was kind of happy at first when they decided not to put it there. But then when I got up to the top of the hill and looked the whole thing over, I thought, this is not only not better, it's probably worse. So my friends and I got together and thought, we have to see if we could possibly stop it.
Okay.
Now, how do you stop the Army? Now, here we're 4...
I'm envisioning like Tiananmen Square, the guy standing in front of the tank. It's not quite there yet,
Not
though, right?
quite there yet,
Okay,
no.
I have a very active imagination.
Yeah, so do I.
Okay,
We were kind of thinking almost like that ourselves.
But if it comes to that, you never know.
You never know.
Okay.
So 4 of us who are both in our 70s and 80s, I'm not the oldest one. One of my friends is 89, I'm 81. One is 77, I think, and one is in her 50s. And we thought, now, what do we do now? How are we going to get around this thing? With no power. We don't have any, we don't have any political power. But being good Americans, believing that Democrats, with a small d, have power if they want to acquire it, can do what they want to do.
Sure.
We can maybe have some power. So we began calling neighbors of Lee Farm, and then other friends who didn't even, I don't actually live near Lee Farm. None of us live near Lee Farm, by the way.
Okay.
This is not one of those not in my backyard things at all. It was a question of having, I grew up in the general neighborhood, and it was so funny when I heard that they were going to put the Army, or thinking the Army was going to go there, I all of a sudden got this sinking feeling that this beautiful piece of land that I had always taken for granted might suddenly disappear. Right. It might suddenly become, not just the Army might not occupy it, it might suddenly be built up with cluster housing, it might be built up with all kinds of things. It had never dawned on me that Lee Farm might not always be just this beautiful meadow, gorgeous thing. So we began to...
Just real quick, just inform people that this is not like public land here. This is not owned by the city of Danbury. It's private land.
It's somebody's private land. It belonged originally, Frank Lee, who was a hat manufacturer in the late and early 1900s, owned it. And had it as I guess, a hobby kind of thing, a farm, a dairy farm. And his children and grandchildren have lived on it, and I think they've always loved it forever. Obviously, it's not a dairy farm any longer. But it's just sort of been there. It's been preserved as a beautiful piece of open space. So we began thinking about it and thought, do we want to see the Army on it? Do we want to see cluster housing on it? Do we want to see industry on it? And some of it's actually zoned for industry. Well, we didn't like anything like that. We just had this thing like, we can't let this happen. So what do? So we called all of our friends and neighbors and got them to sign on to, not a petition exactly, but to a letter that we could write. But who do we write it to? We write it to the Army? Okay, so we're going to write a letter to the Army. So we got all excited about it, and suddenly we found out that there were lots of other people besides just the four of us who were also on the same wavelength. So we hooked up with them. There were these men called Joe DeComo, Justin Melito, Lynn Hoddes and her husband, Joan, what is Joan's last name? She lives over by the airport. I can't think of her last name now, that's terrible. Anyway, it turns out a lot of other people had been very exercised about the same problem. So we decided what we would do would be to write a letter to the city council and ask if they would look into the concept of maybe acquiring Lee Farm for open space. This was kind of a big jump from being worried about the Army. And my son Paul, who's on the council, said that if you do that, if you write that kind of a letter to the city council, they're required by law to form a committee to look into it. So that was step number one. Step number two was we wanted to go to the city council and ask them if they could do something about stopping the Army from doing it. We didn't know how to go about it at all. So Paul said that there was going to be on the agenda for the September meeting, there would be an item which would allow people who want to speak about the Army to speak about the Army.
And that's some of the video footage we showed at the beginning here, some of the public speaking out in opposition to it.
Thank you. We got them. Thanks. So we did. We got a lot of people together.
Let me just on the other side of the coin, and Al, maybe you would know better on this, because I see there are other politicians that are on the other side of this one.
Councilman Sadi is
how much revenue would this mean to the town? And I know that's only one side of the equation. Do we have a number on that?
There's no revenue. They don't pay, the Army doesn't pay any taxes.
They wouldn't pay any local taxes?
They don't pay anything at all. No, they don't pay anything at all.
So the only benefit would be that they would be eating in the restaurants, theoretically shopping in the area, and that
but they're only here from Friday night until Sunday, late Sunday afternoon. And they would go out at night. And they said, I've talked to different people who are in the reserves in different places, and they say they go out to a bar or they go to a restaurant. But there really isn't much of that. The thing that they do emphasize, to the Army says, is that if there were an emergency like a flood, they'd be here. If the flood happened on a weekend, they would be here. If it didn't happen on a weekend, they wouldn't.
Now the entity that owns this property now is called Lee Farm LLC. Do you know, is this like...
The people that own it are two families. They're the descendants of Frank Lee, who was the hat manufacturer.
So now it would seem like they might be civically minded. I'll just tell you, this is something we did in Ridgefield,
right,
where you have the descendants and the generations.
Right.
Money's getting a little tight. It's not the salad days when this was the hat center of the world. And
exactly.
But you can do this thing called purchasing the development rights. And what that would mean is you cut a deal with these, descendants, the families, and you say, look, we don't want this pristine. They have childhood memories of the same property.
They do. They
but
really
they say
do.
for a designated amount of money, $1 million, $2 million, whatever it is, we will buy the development rights for this property for 100 years.
Right.
And then they get to cash in their property and still live there, and the public gets to enjoy it, and there isn't this encroachment on open space.
I actually wrote a letter to
it worked in
one of the
Ridgefield. We did
heirs.
with Lounsbury Farms. It works great.
Yes, it's a very interesting
and it's still
concept.
a farm today.
They did that in Danbury. They did that with Don Taylor's farm, which is Don Taylor over at the other end of town.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
It's a wonderful way of doing it.
Yeah.
So first we wrote this. Our little group of 4 ladies wrote a letter to the heirs and asked if they would be. We just took a crazy dare and said, would you like to give some of your land to the city?
It's been done.
Because the Richter family did it in Danbury, and Cephas Rogers did it. That's how we have Rogers
New
Park.
York was donated by the Rockefellers.
Yeah.
And it's a big tax dodge.
So we just took a chance, and they didn't really respond to that. So the next letter we wrote said, how would you like to do the kind of thing you were talking about? And that didn't we didn't get really an answer to that. So after that, we decided to go the more conventional route, which was to try to see whether maybe the city might like at some point to buy some of this land for open space or whatever. But in the meantime, I have some exciting news to tell you.
Okay, I got to keep you on the clock. You got 3 minutes.
Very exciting.
Give it to us.
This afternoon.
We love breaking news.
This is breaking news.
Okay.
Right here and now.
Here
I'm
we
going to
go.
tell you right now. This afternoon, my son Paul came in at 5 o'clock and said to me that Mayor Boughton has sent a letter to the Army asking the Army to respectfully request them to reconsider this inefficiently planned plan to locate their facility on Lee Farm, that it ignores the homeowners' interests, and that there are many alternative sites in Danbury that he would be more than willing to discuss with them.
Wow. That's something I wanted to bring up real quick, is that I live in Danbury, and I know that I can think off the top of my head of at least 2 sites right now that they can go to easily with no problem. One up Newtown Road, one maybe down my exit 1, exit 2.
Right.
It's quite easy. You're still off the interstate. You're not in a residential area such as Lee Farm. Why do you think the Army wants to be at this particular location?
I have no idea. I cannot even begin to figure it out.
Because I'm quite positive they knew of the other locations.
They must have. They must have. And Mark Boughton said, I believe that this project at this location is not in the best interests of the city of Danbury, and I respectfully request that the U.S. Army Reserve chooses another venue. This is really, really important. It's a wonderful thing that he's done.
Well, it's a wonderful piece of...
It's a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a great piece of it's a great piece of space. I mean, the area you're talking about goes all the way back to late Wabika. That's a huge,
and the
huge
different
piece of land.
It also sort of, not butts up right, but Ridgefield set aside Bennett's Pond property.
Right.
A great expense, and a lot of what you're going through now.
Oh, the Bennett's Pond.
And it was a big deal, but all of a sudden you tie in that open space with this open space, and once it's gone forever.
That's it. But this, to me, is the most exciting thing, because when the mayor gets behind something like this, or rather gets behind not having the Army here in this particular spot. Now, nobody is saying the Army shouldn't be in Danbury.
No, of course
Believe
not.
me, this is not anybody's, we're not anti-Army people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places in Danbury this could go. But I'm very happy about this. I was so thrilled that he said this today. And he sent this letter to the city council, and he's sending it to the Army.
Al, how about that Mark Bowden? Is he not a great public servant, looking out for the people and doing stuff like this?
He's a great, swell guy.
You got to love Mark Bowden.
No, I love him.
Come on this show because they have me scared of him. It's another story. I don't want to get you involved.
I like Mark Bowden in many ways.
There you go, another Democrat for Bowden.
Great open space guy.
Well, thank you very much for everything that you're doing, because it is for a great cause, and open space is important.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Our guest this evening has been Christine Rotello, among other things, an open space advocate. You do not want to have this lady and her friends on your case. I don't care if you're the U.S. Army and got nuclear weapons. She wants to keep Lee Farm. She has childhood memories and stay off her farm. Next week, we're going to have Tony Boucher come in. And you know all this talk about the Tea Parties? We got the guy. We got the head of the Tea Party in the state of Connecticut, Bob McGuffey, will be right here in this studio.
Oh,
so we'll have to see if he has 3 heads or if he's really a great American patriot like they make out. So join us next week on Ideas of Work and Beyond, right here from 9 to 10. What else are you going to do? It's Thursday night. It's not the weekend. You might as well watch this show. Thursday night, 9 to 10, we'll have Tony Boucher, State Senator, and Bob McGuffey of the Tea Party movement in Connecticut. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to my guests. Good night.